Welcome to You Coach, your online athletics coaching resource. In this podcast, Coach Mike Hurst talks to Peter Fortune about coaching the former 400-metre Olympic champion Cathy Freeman. Please note that the information provided in this podcast is used solely at the user's own risk. Please listen to the disclaimer at the end of this podcast for full details.
I'm with Peter Fortune, who is best known as the coach of Cathy Freeman throughout, in particular, her adult career. And I think he's had a marvellous career, even had Cathy Freeman not knocked on his door and said, take me to the Olympic gold medal in Sydney and the silver in Atlanta, a couple of world titles in Athens and Seville. So Peter is absolutely a legend in Australian coaching. He's now based in Tasmania, but is originally from Melbourne and plans to return there someday. And we are in Hobart, where Peter is the, I guess he's the track and field performance coordinator for the Tasmanian Institute of Sport these days. But Peter, I guess it's a wonderful thing, and people say, well, Cathy, you know, she was the golden girl and all that, but there's a lot of pressure, I imagine, working with somebody who is the favourite for the Olympic gold medal and dare not fail at the Sydney Olympics, especially after she was given the unique privilege of lighting the Olympic torch at the Sydney Games. She then had to go out and deliver the result that was expected of you. So, did you feel much pressure there at Sydney?
I think I did, although I was having such a good time in a lot of ways. I didn't really feel it as much as some might have thought. I thought she was well prepared. She'd worked through her racing program. There were some fairly major hiccups 3 or 4 months earlier, not so much from athletically, but from a if you like, a personal and management point of view, which we had to cope with. But such was her absolute determination to succeed at the Olympic Games that it was almost washed with a few minor exceptions. It washed over really well, and she actually led the program. Probably for the first time in her career, she really was put into a real leadership position, and she really led us as her team. She led us through to the Olympic Games.
I'm sure you're being too modest. Did things change with Cathy after? It was the 1995 World Championships in Gothenburg, and she completely blew up in the 400 and finished without a medal, which shocked all of Australians. You know, did that change her? It
changed her quite a lot. That was probably the most significant single event she ran in that actually caused a rethink to her. She really thought she was fairly indestructible and unbeatable in a lot of ways. I mean, she was realistic, but she also had an incredible self-belief in herself. And the Gothenburg race, where she didn't run a race plan at all and really affected her thinking on running 400s after that. And that was probably, in a lot of ways, it was a good outcome. She was so annoyed, and annoyed I think is probably angry and annoyed is the words, not upset or shattered. It was angry and annoyed that she had allowed herself to so totally lose the plot in Gothenburg, and I think that was quite a very significant event in her later races. She, with only one exception after that, I think she always was very determined to run a good, efficient race plan.
Well, 12 months later, she runs 48.6, which is an Australian record that I don't think will be broken in my lifetime.
No.
And it is an absolute landmark performance in Australian sport, albeit that she was beaten by Marie-Josée Pérec, of France, coached then by John Smith. What was the difference? Was it just the game plan, or did she train harder as well, or what happened there?
I think she had some very good pre-training. We went to Atlanta in April to do a training stint there to check the lie of the land. She did some terrific sessions in Atlanta.
In 1996.
96, yes. Probably, in a lot of ways, some of the best sessions she's ever done, although I think actually she was a stronger athlete in 2000, but she probably wasn't a faster athlete. And 96 was almost maybe the peak of her physical condition in some respects, in a combined sense. And I think her speed was very good, although not as good as Perex, and that was probably the difference between the two of them was, one was small and one was large, so I suppose a good big one will sometimes beat a good little one. But she was, she went through the 200 quicker than she'd been before, possibly no quicker than Gothenburg, but certainly with a lot more behind her. 95, she was still really developing the strength to run 400s properly, and I think it took till at least 96 to get to the point where she could really attack and run 400 metres properly. There were some issues after 96 which really took, in a lot of ways, until 2000 to overcome. But she still retained a lot of success in between. But I never thought she was quite at the shape she was in Atlanta until 2000.
Yeah, I think she ran something like 23.4 at the 200 split in her race that yielded the Commonwealth record 48.6. Can you give us an insight into your race plan for that meet, for Atlanta, and then beyond that coming into Sydney? Sydney clearly was more about the gold medal as well.
Sydney was about the gold medal, and the race plan was fractionally different because I was confident in her form, in her ability to win in Sydney. I'd probably never thought she'd win Atlanta before the race. But my idea of a race plan is I like to encourage athletes to really work the first 50 metres of the 400. I think that's in a lot of ways a no-lose section of a race where a good first 50 can mean a couple of metres, which may be the vital couple of metres at the finish of the race. I think it sets the athlete up. I think it's much easier to relax off a very fast pace than it is to speed up off a slow start. I think you use less energy doing that, and I think energy conservation is so important in the 400. Work through the 200, pick it up a little bit through 200. You have to make up for the fatigue factor and the bend factor, I think, to try and retain as much speed as you can, and then you really work from 130, 140, 120 out to really spend the last amount of real energy that you've got before you're into holding on and conserving up the straight and holding form. And that was pretty well the plan for Atlanta. I actually think she was so excited that I think she possibly didn't really follow the race plan, although she was in such good shape it almost didn't matter. Sydney was much more circumspect. She really did relax the first 200. It was a very, very relaxed first 100. I think she was really going quite sub-maximally in a lot of ways, and so much so that she was very, very strong in the last 200 in Sydney, so much so that her differential was only 1 second, which is pretty good differential. And but her first 200 was somewhat slower than Atlanta. The time wasn't as fast, but the idea was to ensure that no runner came past her in the last 50 metres because of fatigue and going through too fast.
How important did Cathy regard the race plan of coming into Sydney? I heard that she wrote it on her hand even.
Well, I don't know that she had it written on her hand, but she certainly, I'd written it down on a very small piece of paper that she could put in her spike bag and take with her. The last thing she really wanted to do in the warm-up track was to go over the race plan. She was very calm, I thought, as distinct from Gothenburg when she was in the warm-up track was highly excited and I thought over-aroused, and I was concerned before the race in Gothenburg. But in both Atlanta and Sydney, she was quite calm, I thought, and really had a focus on what she had to do. And one of her sayings was that she didn't think much about winning or losing, but she did think a lot about what she had to do.
So she thought about the process.
She did think about the process a lot.
More so than the outcome. Did it ever concern you that she had a pretty different sort of a mechanics to most of the so-called technically highly coached individuals, but her action was so smooth and fluent? Did you would have thought perhaps of changing it? Did you think, no, don't mess with what works?
I did think about, and I in retrospect now, I would have worked a bit more technically, mainly to do with the 200 metres than the 4. I thought her running action at 400 was, I thought it was quite acceptable, but for 200 she wasn't a particularly good bend runner, and I think that was, I take some responsibility for that. She had a very long stride. Her stride was something like 2 metres 30 when she was in full flight, which for a small girl is an enormous stride. But I don't think she compromised landing, and I don't think, she ran so tall that I didn't really want to play with it very much, but I would have, in retrospect, liked to have worked more on the bend part of the 200. I think she lost a lot of, she could have been a sub 22 second 200 runner had she have had a better bend. She often would run an enormous differential between first 100 and second 100 in her 200s, but I suppose since about 94 it was clear that the 400 was really the main task. So I didn't spend as much time as I think I should have on that aspect. But I think she had such a lot of good technical aspects that I didn't really want to play too much with them in case I took some of the good away with trying to fix some of the not so good. But generally speaking, I was for 400 metre running. There were obviously faults. Her arm action could have been better. But I'm probably I come from more the conditioning end of things than the technical end, I suppose, from naturally. So I suppose that's, I wouldn't mind to have had another go. But, generally speaking, she had a pretty good outcome from her career.
Yeah, not too bad. I'd heard that she would write down the time that she was going to aim for, and that in Atlanta, allegedly, that she said, "Fort, what do I need to run to win in Atlanta?" And the rumour was you said 48.6, which of course is exactly what she did run, and then apparently or allegedly, and this is apocryphal, but she said, "Fort, why didn't you tell me 48.4 or 48.2 or whatever it was, because I could have run that, I would have run that." She's just had this incredible mind power.
Well, she did, but I'm not sure that's a true story. I think what was true, that she had written earlier than that, when she was just starting out, really, she'd written down on a mirror, I believe, that she wanted to run 48.6. And that at the time when she was running probably 51 seconds. But that, I gather, is a true story, and I never saw the mirror, but she had written down 48.6 as what she wanted to run. Now, I don't know about why didn't I tell her? I don't think I even thought of 48.6, so I think it's not quite true.
Oh, Fort. Never let the facts spoil a good story.
Know, it's still a good story, the writing in the mirror when you're 17 or 18 or 19 that you want to run 48.6. And it was very...
Then I don't want to get all mystical about this, but the Aboriginal people do speak of dreaming.
They do.
They dream their world into existence.
They certainly do.
They do have that dream time.
And I think that's partially true in her case. I think there certainly were some things going on in her mind that maybe were a little bit different. Certainly she certainly thought about a lot of things differently to other athletes that I've certainly worked with and noticed. And I think her incredible strength of purpose was really the thing that stood her in great stead. And she had quite a casual approach to life and didn't. People would be amazed how calm she was. She could drop off to sleep at the drop of a hat any time she wanted to, and she could be quite calm and gracious and everything before and after races. But once she put her feet into the blocks, had an incredible will to win, which I've never seen better in any athlete ever.
When you finally got to speak to her after she achieved every athlete and coach's dream of winning the gold medal, and particularly in a home Olympics, what did she say to you? What were her first words to you?
First words that it was down in the depths of the stadium after the race, and I finally got down there because I didn't really have accreditation to get there, but they got me down there, and the first thing she said was nothing about winning the gold medal or anything like that. She just said, was I disappointed with the time she ran? Because it wasn't a personal best, and I thought that was quite astounding at the time. I almost fell over, but I said I wasn't at all concerned about the time. I was very happy with the gold medal, and I think that was just summed up a little bit that she didn't quite react the same as a lot of athletes. You may have noticed the film after the race where there was initially no smile at all. She just sat down at the track and looked almost like, well, it was an unusual picture of a mixture of relief and almost what have I just done, but there was no immediate, hands in the air, running around. It took her quite a while to pick up a flag. She took her spikes off. Some people thought she was exhausted, and actually she was far from exhausted. I think she found the Sydney, physically, the Sydney race was probably one of the easier races she's ever run.
I was very impressed because when she started to do that victory lap,
yes,
one of the photographers, Anthony Wheat, was jogging backwards, as they do,
yes,
trying to get the shot, and he fell. He fell over somebody else's foot, went down with all this camera stacked up on his chest, and the only person who went to his aid was Freeman, who lifted him up off the track. I was so impressed with that.
Well, she was quite different in a lot of ways, and that's the sort of thing she would do at times. And she certainly got exhilarated soon after, and went across to her family, who were certainly a lot more excited maybe than she was. But look, that sort of thing doesn't surprise me at all.
No.
I didn't actually know that, Michael.
Well, Anthony and I went into Africa the year earlier, in 1999, to chase around after El Garouge and a few others. So I know Anthony very well. Lovely bloke. Do you maintain much contact with Cathy these days? 'Cause she's pretty busy, isn't she? She's a mum now.
Well, she's a mother now, and she's very involved in the Cathy Freeman Foundation, which is a foundation she set up to help Indigenous people, which in the last year or two has been focusing on the fairly disadvantaged population of Palm Island, which is an island off Queensland, which has had a lot of difficulty. It's got a large Indigenous population. So she's working hard with that. I contact her regularly, and we talk regularly. I don't see a huge amount being in Tasmania now. Something I'll take up again when I get back to the mainland. But we have a very good relationship. But we're certainly not in each other's pockets or anything like that. So she has her life, and I suppose I have mine. And but we've got a very good, solid, strong relationship.
Peter, can you give us a couple of the principles that guided you in your coaching career? And I'm also very interested, obviously, in the kind of weight training that you did, or whether you did circuit work or heavy lifting, or what kind of weightlifting and strength training did you do with Cathy? Are you a great believer in hills? Are they short and steep, or long and shallow? Mm-hmm.
Well, certainly with strength training, I I did most of her strength training myself. Now, that's probably controversial now, and maybe now I may not do that. It's certainly been an industry developed probably since the Freeman started on strength and conditioning experts, and all the institutes now have discrete strength and conditioning experts who often for a number of reasons you may involve them. Most of the time I did her weights program because I'd grown up with that from the 70s, where coaches tended to do all aspects of an athlete's training, so I probably didn't, almost at the start of it, probably didn't know any different. I got certainly some help from some key coaching figures, probably mainly coaches like Dr. John Boas, who was a very good famous long jump coach in Australia, who coached Gary Honey and David Colbert and a few others to very good long jump results. So initially we started at the gym that he was using. Fairly simple weight training, really. It was based around Olympic lifting mainly. We did bench press, which has gone out of favour, I think, these days, but I still quite like it. And she was very, very, for her weight, she raced about 52 kilograms. And she could bench well over 80 kilograms, which is very, very strong, I believe, for that weight. I haven't heard of too many being able to lift more than that. Now, all right, that's, you can say, is it very useful to be able to bench 85 kilograms? Probably not, but I think it helped her confidence. She certainly developed over the years. Squatting, we tended to only use half squats, but she was well over 100 kilograms. She was able to do 120, 130 kilograms. She would power clean about 75, which for her size again is pretty good going, I think. So we're talking nearly double body weight. So she was, for her size, extremely strong. Possibly didn't do enough power oriented work. That might be a change I would ensure. We did do some, but it probably could have been a bit more. But I did periodise her weights program somewhat. She did do quite a lot of circuit training. I'm quite a believer in body circuits. I think they have a good place, especially for a travelling athlete, where you can't always, you may be you're stuck in a hotel room. So I devised quite a lot of circuits that you could do with no equipment, and we did that pretty well all through her career, and that was probably a 3 or 4 times a week segment of her training. Hill-wise, yes, we did quite a lot of hills. She did a hill session the morning of a race where she ran 50.4 in Hobart quite early on. That was, I don't know why we did that really. It was just something to try and take a bit of the actual intent off the race a little bit, to try and maybe work on the psychology a little bit. But it wasn't a hard session, but she did do something that morning. We ran effectively 2 main hills. One was a grass hill near our house, which was often a morning session, which was about 140 metres, moderately steep, but not one that you could actually run quite hard at. You could run pretty well normal mechanics on that one, and it was grass, so it was fairly low impact, and a nice session to do at 7:30 in the morning. It was near the central part of Melbourne. It was very quiet and quite nice there, just near the MCG for those that know the Melbourne cricket ground. The other hill we used a lot was a bitumen path on the foreshore of one of the Bayside beaches in Melbourne, and that was about 180 metres long. Once again, moderate gradient. It went from the foreshore up to a car park at the top of somewhat above the beach area, and she would do that. Was more done as a rep session, where it would be either half or full ramps, and she'd run strongly up that and walk back straight down and repeat. They were the major hills we used. We did use some others, but they were and that was very regular through her whole program, including the competitive season. I know people would say don't do resistance work too close, but I found it was, I think, very valuable very valuable part of her training.
Did you use the hills as a bridge between the gym, the weight work, and the track, or what was the purpose of it?
Probably not. I think I used the hill as a variety of training, a way of getting off the track. I think running up a hill is much easier on the body than either running downhill or even running on a track. I was lucky with Freeman that she was very resilient. She had very few major injuries throughout her whole career, which certainly is a great help to a coach. But it was more a variety thing, I think. And it was a very nice aesthetic area, and I think she really enjoyed going to it. She was sort of athlete who became quite attached to her regular venues. We used a very small gymnasium in a school in Melbourne right throughout, and she was very comfortable there. The people that used it knew her, didn't make a fuss. She was often very wary of being made a fuss of, and didn't really enjoy very much the recognition factor. But this gym was really good, and she went there. We were there 11 years, and we did use the institute, the Victorian Institute's gym as well. But I think she was happiest when she was at the college gymnasium that she spent a lot of time at.
She was known later in her career as being a very good finisher. Part of that, I guess, is because she's just so relaxed. To get that finish, did you do particular work for that? Were you running over distance or over time, or was her ability to finish largely based on her speed reserve through to, say, the 200?
Look, I think it's a mixture of all of those. I think the speed reserve factor certainly in Sydney was a huge factor, but I think I was confident based on what I'd seen and what she'd done in 2000 that she was the strongest and fittest athlete that was going to race that final. I was quite convinced about that. And also the benefit of pretty well knowing that she was actually the fastest sprinter in that race. So I thought my confidence about Sydney was based around the fact that I thought she was the strongest athlete and the fastest athlete. And if you're the strongest and the fastest athlete, you're probably a fair way towards winning the race. So that was the basis of I think she was very, very fit. And that was an accumulation thing as much as anything else. I think she'd been training for 400s for about 6 or 7 years by then. And I think that was at about exactly the right time. She was about 27 years of age, probably at the peak of her physical powers in a lot of ways by Sydney. So it was an accumulation, but we did do quite a lot of training aimed at working the finish. We did most of our training at virtually all the track training she did was at race pace, but that's not necessarily 23.4 200 pace. It was pace that she would find in the race, and of course the last 50 metres of a 400, people aren't running very fast at all. But we tried to keep all our track work no slower than the pace she would be running in the last 100 of a 400. So that was, I suppose, the basis, and all the sessions were built around that. There were faster work. One of the notable sessions that we did was she would run 6 200-metre reps, aiming at the pace that you'd like to run the last 200 in a 400, and we would diminish the recoveries from 5 minutes down to 1 minute, a minute at a time. And in Atlanta, notably, she ran all those reps at 25 seconds. They didn't vary by more than a tenth. And that was probably the best she ever did on that session. That was in April in Atlanta in 96. She ran it, we did it a lot of times after that. Never probably quite to that level, but it was always a session she did very well. And a lot of athletes try that session and they often get it wrong and they get into terrible trouble. Now, it's not really specific 400 work in a lot of ways. It's more of a conditioner. And we did a lot of work such as run a 300, very short recovery, run a 150, rest, repeat, similar distances. So there's a lot of work where we'd tack on a solid run after a reasonably race-specific repetition to try and to duplicate a little bit of get the strength to finish the race.
That stuff sounds so familiar.
Stuff you've done, Michael. It's not much new in the world, really, but... And look, one of the things was that she had such great continuity and she could build and build and build. And, we had to, because of who she was, it was pretty well double periodising to some degree. But we were in the fortunate position, if you've got a good enough athlete, that you can train through your domestic season. In Australia, a lot of times athletes have to do 2 very big peaks to make teams. She was in a position pretty well after 92 that we could, if you like, relax a little bit in the domestic season, but they were, you couldn't very much, because at that stage in the 90s, it was a very strong period for women sprinting in Australia. We had a number of Melinda Gainsford-Taylor and a number of other girls who were very competitive, certainly with Cathy at 200, not so much at 4, although even in that area there were some very good runners. Unfortunately didn't have the continuity that Catherine had, but certainly at 200 there were some terrific domestic races, and probably the majority of times, it's probably 50-50, but I think Melinda probably had more wins domestically over Cathy than Cathy had over Melinda, but they would trade national titles for a number of years in a lot of ways at 200, and I thought the 200 was very important to Freeman's 400 development. I never wanted to get away from running 2s.
Peter, just one last item before we go off to the track together. Could you give us an idea of the layout of your week? Did you train 5 or 6 days straight, or did you build it and sort of go 2 days on, 1 rest, 3 days on, 1 rest?
It varied, and look, I might, once again, if I had time again, I might do the 2. But she basically trained 6 days a week. We had a day off, usually Friday, most of the time. There were even occasions where she trained 7 days a week, which was probably a bad thing by me. But it depended on the training, and it varied quite a lot. So there were lighter days, but she trained by and large twice a day, 6 days a week, most weeks. Didn't run twice a day often, although there were sometimes we'd do that grass hill in the morning, and then in the evening there might be some track work. It wasn't regular. That tended to be a day. We tended to do that hill session maybe on the morning of the weights night. Did most of our weight training in the evening, but it was track running probably 3 to 4 times a week. There might be 1 or 2 hill sessions, 2 to 3 weights strength sessions, probably 3 circuit sessions. I don't know how many units that adds up to, but there's probably like 12 or 13 units of training in a week for her. But she was pretty well, certainly beyond 96, she was pretty well a full-time athlete, so there was good recovery. The recovery was very important. She had pretty well a personal masseur her whole career, and she would have when she was training in Melbourne, it would be a regular once-a-week visit to the masseur, often on the rest day. That was very regular. When she was travelling Europe, she tended to take the masseur with her. She would be massaged after every training session, which was a wonderful luxury to have, and I think that was a very important aspect. And I think it was a very important aspect to reduce her injuries over the years. And I think that was a wonderful thing that she was able to do, but not many athletes are able to do that, because she was independent and not working.
And you and I must continue working for it. We've got to get to the track.
Yes, we're old codgers, and we're off to the track.
Yes.
Codger coaches there, yeah, but there's a lot to be said for codger coaches. I think codger coaches, which are often dismissed by the young professional fraternity, but I can't help but notice, as an aside, when you watch the Olympic Games and the World Championships on the television, and they flash up to the grandstand where the coach is, which they often do, especially in field events, and so many of those coaches aren't young.
No, they're bald.
They're bald and old, and they still obviously have a very strong place, which I think some people lose sight of, maybe.
Yes. Ooh. Okay. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much, Mike. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
This audio presentation is brought to you by UCoach. If you have any questions or comments regarding its content, feel free to use the comment form at the bottom of this page. This is your athletics coaching resource, and we look forward to reading your feedback. Disclaimer. The information provided in this audio presentation is used solely at the user's own risk. UK Athletics Limited and the individuals represented in this audio presentation have taken reasonable care to ensure that the information contained on it is accurate. However, no warranty or representation is given that the information and materials contained in this audio presentation are complete or free from errors or inaccuracies. To the extent permitted by applicable law, UK Athletics Limited accepts no liability for any loss or damages or expenses of any kind, including without limitation, compensatory, direct, indirect or consequential damages, income or profit, loss of or damage to property, or claims by third parties however so arising in connection with the use of the audio presentation or the materials contained within it. This exclusion of liability shall not apply to damages arising from the death or personal injury caused by the negligence of UK Athletics Limited or any of its employees or agents.